The morning light filtered through the ornate windows of the Grevin Museum in Paris, as curators made their final adjustments to the newest addition to their collection. The 20th of November 2025 marked a significant moment in the museum's history, one that would resonate deeply with visitors from around the world. After nearly 3 decades since her tragic death in the City of Light, Princess Diana was returning to Paris, immortalized in wax, and wearing the dress that had come to define her fierce independence. The museum director stood quietly, observing the life-size figure of Diana. His decision to commission this particular tribute had been sparked months earlier, during a visit to London's famous Madame Tussauds. Walking through the halls of the British institution, he had expected to be moved by their representation of the beloved princess. Instead, he found himself deeply underwhelmed. The figure there seemed to lack something essential: the spirit, the defiance, the elegance that had made Diana such an enduring icon. That disappointment had planted a seed that would bloom into something extraordinary. Back in Paris, the director had assembled his team with a clear vision. They wouldn't just create another wax figure. They would capture a moment that defined Diana's transformation from a fairy tale princess to a woman who refused to be diminished. The choice of outfit was never in question. The black, off-the-shoulder cocktail dress designed by Christina Stambolian represented so much more than fashion. It was armor, statement, and liberation all sewn into silk. The timing of the unveiling carried its own significance. Exactly 30 years earlier, on the 20th of November 1995, Diana had sat before BBC cameras for her explosive Panorama interview. In that conversation, she had spoken with unprecedented candor about her life within the royal family, uttering the now legendary words that would echo through history. "We were 3 in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." The museum's decision to commemorate this anniversary was deliberate, linking 2 pivotal moments in Diana's journey toward self-determination. As the craftsmen worked on the figure, they paid meticulous attention to every detail. The dress itself was a faithful replica of Stambolian's original creation, figure-hugging black silk that defied royal protocol. In the conservative world of British royalty, black was traditionally reserved for mourning. For a Princess of Wales to wear such a revealing dress, in such a color, was unprecedented. The pearl choker at her neck provided a touch of classic elegance, while the small black handbag clasped in both hands suggested both vulnerability and determination. The museum's workshops had seen many famous faces take shape over the decades. Founded in the 19th century, Grevin had long been one of Europe's most prestigious wax museums, its halls filled with political leaders, artists, and cultural icons. The institution already housed figures of King Charles III and the late Queen Elizabeth II, making Diana's absence all the more notable. Now, as November 2025 approached, that gap was finally being addressed. The story behind the dress added layers of meaning to the museum's choice. On the 29th of June 1994, Diana had faced a crossroads. Originally, she had planned to skip the Serpentine Gallery fundraiser that evening. The same night, Prince Charles was scheduled to appear in a television documentary where he would publicly acknowledge his affair with Camilla Parker Bowles. Diana's first instinct had been to stay home, to avoid the inevitable media circus. But something shifted in her thinking that day. Instead of hiding, she would face the cameras on her own terms. She called Christina Stambolian, asking for the daring black dress the designer had created 3 years earlier. A dress Diana had previously considered too bold. When she stepped out of her car at the Serpentine Gallery, the transformation was complete. The woman who emerged was not the shy kindergarten teacher who had married into royalty. She was confident, radiant, and undeniably in control of her narrative. French novelist Christine Orban, who had written Mademoiselle Spencer from Diana's imagined perspective, understood the symbolism perfectly. During preparations for the unveiling, she reflected on what the dress represented. In her view, it marked a turning point, not just in Diana's story, but in how women could reclaim their power in the face of public humiliation. The choice to wear designer shoes, some even claimed they were Louboutins, and to ensure she would be photographed from every angle, was strategic brilliance. The placement of Diana's figure within the museum was another carefully considered decision. Rather than positioning her alongside the other British royals in the Heads of State gallery, curators chose to place her among entertainment and fashion figures. This wasn't a slight. It was recognition of Diana's unique position in popular culture. She had transcended her royal title to become something more universal. An icon of style, compassion, and resilience. Even more intriguingly, the curators decided to position Diana near another famous royal who had met her end in Paris, Marie Antoinette. Separated by centuries but united by their tragic fates in the French capital, the two women represented different eras of monarchy, privilege, and ultimately, mortality. The parallel wasn't lost on the museum's historians, who saw in both figures a complex relationship between public adoration and private suffering. For Paris itself, hosting Diana's likeness carried profound emotional weight. The city had never quite recovered from that August night in 1997, when Diana's Mercedes crashed in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. The makeshift memorials that sprang up in the days following her death had evolved into permanent places of remembrance. Flowers still appeared regularly at the Flame of Liberty near the tunnel, left by visitors who couldn't forget the princess who had died pursuing love and freedom in their city. Now, the Greven Museum would offer another space for remembrance, though one focused on Diana's strength rather than her tragedy. The doors of the Greven Museum opened early that Thursday morning, and within hours, word had spread through social media and news outlets that Diana had returned to Paris. Visitors began arriving in steady streams, many drawn specifically by the announcement of the new installation. The museum staff, accustomed to the usual flow of tourists, found themselves managing crowds that seemed particularly emotional, particularly invested in this specific figure. Among the first visitors was Julien Martin, a 38-year-old Parisian who had been just a child when Diana died. Standing before the wax figure, he found memories flooding back. Not his own memories of Diana, but of how the city had mourned. He remembered his parents watching the news coverage, the flowers piling up across Paris, the sense that something precious had been lost. It brought back that night in the tunnel, he told a reporter, his voice thick with unexpected emotion. His observation that Paris had never completely let go of Diana rang true for many in the crowd. Younger visitors brought different perspectives. Lena Ben Amar, a 24-year-old student who wasn't even born when Diana died, represented a generation that knew the princess only through documentaries, photographs, and their parents' stories. Yet standing before the figure in the revenge dress, she felt a connection that surprised her. To her generation, Diana seemed like the first truly modern princess, someone who was glamorous but also vulnerable, who used her platform for change while struggling with her own demons. The dress itself spoke to young women who understood the power of fashion as statement, as armor, as rebellion. The museum had anticipated interest, but the emotional intensity of visitor responses exceeded expectations. People didn't just look and move on as they might with other figures. They lingered, taking photos from every angle, reading and rereading the plaques that explained the significance of the dress and the date. Museum staff noticed visitors returning to Diana multiple times during their visit, as if drawn by some magnetic pull. The French fascination with Diana and the British royals more broadly presented an interesting paradox. France, after all, had violently rejected monarchy during the Revolution, sending their own royals to the guillotine. Yet French media covered the British royal family with intense interest, and Diana had always held a special place in French hearts. Royal expert Bertrand Deckers, himself Belgian, observed this phenomenon with amusement. He suggested that the French had essentially adopted the Windsors as their surrogate royal family, finding in them all the drama and glamour of monarchy without the political complications. The revenge dress itself had become a cultural touchstone that transcended its original context. Fashion historians noted how it had inspired countless revenge dress moments in popular culture, from celebrities making statements at premieres following breakups to everyday women choosing bold outfits for difficult occasions. The concept had entered the lexicon, understood globally as shorthand for reclaiming power through appearance. Social media exploded with reactions to the unveiling. Comments ranged from praise for the museum's timing to critiques of the figure's likeness. Some observers noted that while the dress and pose were perfect, something in the face didn't quite capture Diana's specific blend of vulnerability and strength. Others defended the sculpture, arguing that capturing someone's essence in wax was always an impossible task, and that the symbolism mattered more than perfect physical accuracy. One particularly astute commenter pointed out the deliberate, powerful statement made by displaying Diana away from the other royals. The physical distance within the museum reflected the emotional distance Diana had fought to establish in life. She was no longer defined by her relationship to Charles or her position within the monarchy. She stood alone, magnificent in her independence. The museum's official statement emphasized Diana's enduring relevance. More than 28 years after her tragic death in Paris, Diana is still a major figure in global pop culture, celebrated for her style, humanity, and independence. They described the revenge dress as a statement of reclaimed self-assertion, a powerful image of determined femininity and renewed confidence. Behind the scenes, the museum revealed an intriguing detail. They had actually been in contact with Diana herself near the end of her life about creating a figure. Those plans had been abandoned after her death. The tragedy too fresh, the wounds too raw. Only now, nearly 3 decades later, did it feel appropriate to complete what had been started. The business implications of the new edition were significant. Tourism officials predicted an uptick in visitors, particularly from the UK and Commonwealth countries. The Grevin Museum, while respected, had always lived somewhat in the shadow of London's Madame Tussauds. Now they had something unique, not just a Diana figure, but Diana at her most defiant, in the city where her story ended. For Buckingham Palace, the unveiling presented a delicate situation. Royal experts like Deckers noted that from Charles's perspective, now King Charles III, and from the palace's viewpoint, this particular tribute was hardly ideal. The revenge dress specifically highlighted one of the most painful and embarrassing periods in royal history. It immortalized a moment when the careful facade of royal perfection had crumbled spectacularly. The palace's preference would undoubtedly have been for the world to move on, to focus on the present rather than relitigating the past. But Diana's story refused to fade. Each new generation discovered her anew, finding in her struggles something that resonated with their own experiences. The woman who had been dismissed by some royals as unstable or difficult had become a symbol of strength for millions. The timing with the Panorama anniversary added another layer of complexity. That interview remained controversial even 30 years later. Recent investigations had revealed the deceptive methods used to secure Diana's participation, raising questions about media ethics and exploitation. Yet the words Diana spoke that night, about there being 3 people in her marriage, about wanting to be a queen in people's hearts, had become part of history. They couldn't be unsaid, unexplained, or forgotten. As evening fell over Paris that November day, the Grevin Museum prepared to close its doors on what had been an extraordinary opening. But the conversations sparked by Diana's wax figure continued to ripple outward, touching on themes that went far beyond a single dress or a moment frozen in time. The installation had become a catalyst for examining how we remember, how we mythologize, and how certain figures transcend their original contexts to become symbols of something larger. The museum's choice to unveil the figure on the Panorama anniversary hadn't been arbitrary. That interview, conducted by Martin Bashir, through methods later exposed as deceptive, had marked a point of no return for Diana. In it, she had broken the cardinal rule of royalty: never explain, never complain. Her willingness to speak openly about her eating disorders, her husband's infidelity, and her own struggles had shattered precedent. The revenge dress and the interview were bookends to a period when Diana rewrote the rules of public femininity. Fashion historians contextualize the dress within the broader evolution of women's power dressing. The 1,990 seconds had seen women in public life beginning to use fashion more strategically, understanding that cameras were weapons that could be turned to one's advantage. Diana's choice to wear the Stambolian dress wasn't just personal, it was political. She understood the grammar of images, how a photograph could say what palace protocols would never allow her to speak. The dress designer, Christina Stambolian, had her own perspective on that night. She had created the garment 3 years before Diana wore it, during a time when the princess was still attempting to work within royal constraints. The fact that Diana had initially deemed it too daring spoke volumes about her journey. By 1994, too daring had become exactly right. The designer watched with satisfaction as her creation became one of the most famous dresses in history, copied endlessly but never quite replicated in its impact. Psychologists and social commentators weighed in on why this particular moment resonated so deeply across cultures and generations. Diana's action that night represented something universal. The moment when someone stops accepting humiliation and starts authoring their own story. In relationships, in workplaces, in families around the world, people understood that feeling of deciding to stop being diminished. The dress became a symbol of that transformation. The French public's response revealed the unique position Paris held in Diana's story. The city that had witnessed her final moments was now hosting her triumphant image. Taxi drivers reported taking tourists to both locations, the tunnel where she died and the museum where she lived again in wax. It created an emotional journey through the city, from tragedy to triumph, from ending to a kind of immortality. Cultural critics noted how Diana's image had evolved in the years since her death. Early memorials had focused on her as a victim of a cold royal family, of media intrusion, of a patriarchal system. But increasingly, she was being remembered for her strength. The revenge dress epitomized this shift. It wasn't about what was done to her but about what she chose to do. Agency had replaced victimhood in the narrative. The positioning near Marie Antoinette sparked its own discussions. Both women had been thrust into royal roles they were arguably unsuited for. Both had been vilified and adored in equal measure. Both had died young in Paris. But where Marie Antoinette had been overwhelmed by forces beyond her control, Diana had fought to carve out her own space. The comparison illuminated how much had changed for women between the 18th and 20th centuries, even within the constraints of monarchy. Museum attendance figures in the days following the unveiling showed unprecedented interest. Virtual tours and social media posts spread images globally, sparking discussions in living rooms and classrooms about Diana's legacy. Teachers used the moment to discuss media literacy, women's history, and the evolution of public relations. The wax figure had become an educational tool, a conversation starter about power, image, and self-determination. The British press coverage was predictably intense but notably divided. Some outlets focused on the revenge aspect, playing up the drama and the wounds it reopened. Others took a more reflective tone, considering what Diana's evolution meant for the current generation of royals. The emergence of Catherine, Princess of Wales, and Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, had shown that Diana's battles had paved the way for different kinds of royal women, even if the institution itself remained fundamentally unchanged. Publishers rushed to capitalize on renewed interest, reissuing Diana biographies and commissioning new ones. Documentaries were updated with segments about the Paris tribute. The fashion industry saw a spike in searches for Diana-inspired looks, with the revenge dress silhouette particularly popular. A moment from 1994 was influencing fashion in 2025, proof of true iconic status. As the weeks passed and the initial excitement settled, the Grevin Museum's Diana became a regular pilgrimage site. Visitors left flowers, despite museum rules against it. Notes appeared, tucked discreetly near the display. The messages were remarkably consistent across languages and ages. Thank you for showing us strength, for refusing to be silenced, for proving that reinvention was possible, even under the harshest spotlight. The museum staff, initially worried about maintaining appropriate decorum, realized that Diana's figure had become something more than a tourist attraction. It was a shrine of sorts, not to grief but to resilience. They quietly adjusted their policies, allowing the flowers to remain until closing time each day, understanding that people needed to express something that went beyond simple admiration. Royal historians predicted that this wouldn't be the last word on Diana's legacy. Each anniversary, each new revelation, each cultural shift would bring fresh interpretations of her life and meaning. But the revenge dress moment had achieved a kind of permanence in cultural memory. It was Diana at her most self-possessed, making a choice that was entirely her own. The Grevin Museum had succeeded in capturing more than a likeness. They had crystallized a moment when a woman refused to be written out of her own story. In Paris, the city where Diana's life had ended, she stood eternal in black silk and pearls, forever walking into that gallery, forever choosing her own narrative, forever reminding visitors that there was power in refusing to disappear quietly. As the museum prepared for another day of visitors, the morning light once again illuminated Diana's figure. She stood there, handbag clutched, shoulders back, ready to meet the gaze of anyone who came to see her. Not as a victim, not as a fairy tale princess, but as a woman who had learned the hard truth that sometimes the best revenge was simply refusing to be diminished. In death, as in that pivotal moment in life, she had won.